The rain hammered against the stone walls of Windsor Castle that night. James Collier stood at his post, rifled across his chest, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the gates. He had been a royal guard for 12 years. He knew the rhythms of the palace, the silence, the whispers, the secrets that never left these walls, but tonight felt different. Through the north corridor window, he could see a figure pacing back and forth in one of the private rooms. Prince Harry. The younger prince had been restless for weeks now. James had noticed the way Harry's shoulders hunched when he walked, the way his jaw clenched during formal events, the way his eyes darted toward the exits. Like a man planning an escape, James had seen many royals come and go through these halls. But Harry was different. There was a sadness in him that the cameras never caught, a weight that pressed down on him every single day. The radio on James's belt crackled. All clear on the east wing. He pressed the button. North corridor, all clear. But nothing was clear. Not really. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. James had first met Prince Harry 5 years ago during a security briefing. Harry had been polite, friendly even. He remembered names. He asked questions. He treated the guards like human beings, not invisible statues in uniform. That was rare among royals. Over time, James became part of Harry's regular security detail. He saw things others didn't. The late-night phone calls that left Harry pacing until dawn. The arguments behind closed doors. The tension between Harry and his brother, William, that grew thicker with each passing month. Then Meghan came. James watched as Harry transformed. For the first time in years, the prince smiled with his whole face. His steps were lighter. His laughter came easier. But the palace didn't share his joy. The whispers started almost immediately. Staff members who had served for decades suddenly had opinions they shared in hushed tones. Advisors scheduled meetings Harry wasn't invited to. Even family dinners became battlegrounds disguised as tradition. James stood outside many of those dinners. He heard the raised voices, the cold silences that followed, the sound of doors slamming one night. After a particularly brutal family gathering, Harry had stepped outside for air. James was there, as always. Harry had looked at him with tired eyes and said, "Do you ever feel trapped, James? Like the life you're living isn't actually yours?" James hadn't known how to answer. He was a guard. His job was to protect, not to counsel. But something in Harry's voice that night stayed with him. Now, months later, James could see the cracks spreading. Harry was pulling away from the family. The press was brutal, relentless in their attacks on Meghan. And the palace? They did nothing to stop it. James had seen the headlines, the lies printed as truth, the hate spreading like wildfire across social media. And through it all, Harry stood beside his wife, taking blow after blow. While the institution he was born into watched in silence, the rain continued to fall. James glanced back at the window. Harry was on the phone now, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He looked exhausted, defeated. James didn't know it yet, but he was about to become part of a decision that would shake the entire royal family to its core, a decision that would change Harry's life forever. Asterisk. 3 weeks before the announcement that would shock the world, James was assigned to accompany Harry and Meghan to their cottage in Windsor. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend, a break from the chaos, but quiet never lasted long in the royal world. James drove behind the prince's car, his eyes constantly checking mirrors, scanning for threats. Threats from outside he knew how to handle. But the real danger to Harry wasn't from strangers with bad intentions. It was from the system itself, the palace machine that protected the institution above the people within it. When they arrived at Frogmore Cottage, Meghan stepped out first. She looked thin, too thin. James had noticed how her smile had faded over the past year, how she held herself differently now, arms wrapped tight as if shielding something precious. She was pregnant. Only a few people knew. Harry followed, carrying bags, his jaw set in that familiar tense line. He nodded at James. We'll be inside. Just ... Keep everyone else out? Yeah? Yes, sir. James took his position outside. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Through the windows, he could see Harry and Meghan sitting close together on the sofa, talking. Their body language told a story of two people trying to hold on to each other while the world pulled them apart. Around 8 in the evening, Harry opened the door. James, could you come in for a moment? This was unusual. Guards stayed outside unless there was danger. But James followed Harry into the warm cottage. Meghan was making tea in the kitchen, her movements slow and careful. Harry gestured to a chair. Sit, please. James hesitated, then sat. Harry paced the room, running his hands through his hair. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. I need to tell you something. Not as a prince to a guard, as one man to another. Meghan brought over 3 cups of tea. She sat beside Harry, her hand finding his. We're leaving, Harry said. Not just for a weekend. Not for a holiday. We're stepping back from royal duties. From this life. We're moving to Canada and then probably to America. The words hung in the air like smoke. James kept his face neutral, but inside, his mind raced. Leaving, this was unprecedented. Royals didn't just leave. They endured. They suffered in silence behind golden gates and perfect smiles. Does the Queen know? James asked. Harry's laugh was bitter. Not yet. But she will soon. We've tried to talk to them. To find a compromise. Some way to serve the crown while also protecting our family. He looked at Meghan, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. But they won't bend. It's all or nothing. And if staying means watching my wife destroyed the way my mother was, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. James had been there the day Princess Diana died. He was younger then, new to the force. He remembered the shock, the grief that gripped the nation, and he remembered the guilt that lingered in the palace halls. The unspoken knowledge that she had been hounded to her death by a press the royal family could have protected her from, but chose not to. History was repeating itself, and Harry was refusing to let it end the same way. Why are you telling me this? James asked. Meghan spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. Because you've been kind. Because Harry trusts you. And because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because when we announce this, there's going to be chaos. Security will be pulled. Protection will be removed. We'll be on our own. Harry leaned forward. I need to know if you're willing to stay with us. Not as a royal guard. As private security. We can't pay what the palace pays. Not at first. But we need someone who understands what we're up against. Someone we can trust. James looked between them. 2 people who had everything in the world except the one thing that mattered most. Freedom, safety, peace. His career would be over if he left the Royal Guard. His pension, his reputation within the security services, everything he'd built for 12 years would vanish. But then he thought of all the nights. He'd stood outside rooms where Harry sat alone in the dark. All the times he'd seen Meghan flinch at camera flashes. All the headlines that twisted truth into poison. Some decisions are made with the head. Others with the heart. James set down his teacup. When do we leave? The announcement came on January 8, 2020. The world woke up to a statement posted on Harry and Meghan's Instagram page. They were stepping back as senior members of the royal family. James watched the news from his flat in London. His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from other guards. From friends. From his brother. All asking the same question. Did you know? He told no one the truth. Within hours, the palace responded with their own statement. It was brief, cold. Discussions with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are at an early stage. We understand their desire to take a different approach. But these are complicated issues that will take time to work through. Translation. This is war. James had already submitted his resignation from the Royal Guard 3 days earlier. His supervisor had been shocked, then angry. 12 years of service, and James was throwing it away for what? A prince who was abandoning his duty? But James knew better. Harry wasn't abandoning anything. He was choosing something more important. 2 days after the announcement, James received a text from Harry Sandringham. "Tomorrow, emergency family meeting. Can you be ready to move quickly after?" James packed his bags that night. 1 suitcase. Everything else could be sorted later. The meeting at Sandringham Estate lasted 90 minutes. James waited outside with other security personnel. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Other guards wouldn't look at him. Word had spread about his resignation. He was a traitor now in their eyes. When Harry emerged from the meeting, his face was stone. Meghan wasn't with him. She was already in Canada with baby Archie, away from the storm. Harry walked past the other guards without a word. James fell into step beside him. "How bad?" James asked quietly. "Worse than I expected." Harry's voice was tight. "They're stripping us of everything. Titles, security, funding. They want us to choose. Be fully royal or be nothing." They reached the car. Harry paused before getting in, looking back at the grand house where his family still sat, making decisions about his life without him. "My grandmother said something," Harry continued. "She said she understood why I was doing this, that she remembered what it felt like to be trapped. But the institution ... shook his head. "The institution doesn't forgive." They drove in silence for a long time. James kept his eyes on the road, on the mirrors, always watching. The press had gotten wind of the meeting. Cameras waited at every turn, hoping to catch Harry's expression, hoping for tears or anger they could plaster across front pages. "Thank you," Harry said suddenly. "For doing this? For leaving everything behind?" James glanced at him. "You're doing the same thing, sir? Don't call me sir anymore." "Just Harry." James nodded. "Then you can call me James. Not guard. Not officer. Just James." For the first time in days, Harry's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. They flew to Canada the next morning. Private plane, arranged by friends, because the palace had already cut Harry's access to royal transportation. James sat across from Harry, watching the prince stare out the window as England disappeared beneath clouds. When they landed in Victoria, the air was different. Cleaner somehow. Colder. Meghan was waiting at a private residence, Archie asleep in her arms. When Harry saw them, something in him broke. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around his family. Burying his face in Meghan's shoulder, James turned away, giving them privacy. But he heard Harry's voice, muffled and thick with emotion. "We're safe now. We're going to be okay." Meghan's response was quieter, but James caught it. Are we really?" It was a good question, because safety wasn't just about physical protection. It was about security, money, resources, and Harry had just walked away from the most powerful family in the world. The palace hadn't just let him go. They had cut him off completely. No security detail. No financial support. No protection from the palace communications team. Harry and Meghan were on their own. And the media was circling like sharks who smelled blood in the water that first night in Canada. James did a security sweep of the property. It was a large house, but nothing compared to palace standards. No walls, no gates, just trees and a long driveway that anyone could access. He made a list of vulnerabilities. It was long. When he came back inside, Harry was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through news articles. His face grew darker with each headline. "They're saying we're selfish," Harry said without looking up, "that we've betrayed the Queen, that Meghan has destroyed the royal family." James poured himself coffee. "What's the plan?" Harry closed the laptop. "We survive. We build something new. We prove we can make it on our own." He looked at James. "And we tell our story. The truth, before they bury us in lies." That truth would eventually become a book, an interview, a Netflix documentary. But first, they had to make it through the next few months without being torn apart. March brought the pandemic. The world shut down, and for a brief moment, So did the media frenzy around Harry and Meghan. But only briefly. They had moved to Los Angeles by then, to a gated community in Malibu. Better security, more privacy, but also more pressure. This was America, where the press had fewer restrictions, where paparazzi could be more aggressive, where drones could fly over walls and capture photos of their son playing in the backyard. James worked 18-hour days those first months, building security protocols, vetting staff, installing cameras, teaching Harry and Meghan how to live like normal people while still being the most famous couple in the world. It was impossible, of course, but they tried. One evening in April, James found Harry sitting on the back patio, staring at his phone. His hands were shaking. "What happened?" James asked. Harry handed him the phone. It was an article from a British tabloid. The headline read, "Harry abandons family during crisis." The story claimed Harry had refused to return to England during the pandemic, had cut off communication with his father, had turned his back on the Queen when she needed him most. All lies. James knew because he'd been there for every phone call, every video chat with Harry's grandmother, every message Harry sent to his father that went unanswered. But the truth didn't matter. The story fit the narrative the palace wanted. The ungrateful son who chose fame over family. They're never going to stop, are they? Harry's voice was hollow. No matter what we do, no matter how quiet we stay, they're going to keep coming. James sat down beside him. "So what do you want to do?" Harry was quiet for a long moment. "Then, I want to fight back. I want to tell people what really happened. Why we left. What they did to us." To her, he looked toward the house where Meghan was putting Archie to bed. "She almost died, James. She told me she didn't want to be alive anymore. And when I went to them, to the palace, to HR, and begged them to get her help, they said no. They said it would look bad for the institution." The words hung between them like stones. James had suspected. He'd seen Meghan's decline during those final months in England. The way she moved like a ghost through palace halls. The way her smile never reached her eyes anymore. But hearing Harry say it out loud, confirming that the palace had actively refused to help her, "That's when I knew we had to leave," Harry continued. "Because if I stayed, she wouldn't survive it. And I couldn't lose her the way I lost my mother." James understood then why Harry had been so desperate. Why he'd been willing to lose everything. This wasn't about wanting freedom or craving privacy. This was about survival. Over the next year, Harry began working on his story. He met with writers, with producers, with journalists he trusted. Slowly, carefully, he started to speak. The palace's response was swift and cold. News stories appeared in British papers. Sources close to the royal family claimed Harry was bitter, damaged, lying for attention and money. His brother William stopped speaking to him entirely. His father's calls became rare, then stopped. James watched Harry shrink under the weight of it all. This was the cost of speaking truth to power. Isolation, exile, the loss of family. But Harry kept going. Because staying silent had nearly killed his wife, and silence protected the same system that had failed his mother. In March 2021, the interview with Oprah aired. James watched from the security room as the world exploded. 2 hours of truth that the palace had tried desperately to bury. Meghan speaking about her suicidal thoughts. Harry revealing conversations about Archie's skin color. Both of them explaining why they'd had no choice but to leave. The backlash was immediate and brutal. British media called them liars. The palace released a statement. Recollections may vary. 3 words that said everything about how the institution operated. Never admit fault. Never acknowledge pain. Just cast doubt and move on. But something else happened too. Millions of people believed them, supported them, saw their truth, and recognized it as real. James received a call that night from his brother, who still worked for the royal guard. "You picked the wrong side," his brother said. "They'll never forgive you for this." James looked through the window at Harry and Meghan, sitting together on the couch, holding hands, looking exhausted but relieved. Finally heard, finally believed by enough people that it mattered. "I didn't pick a side," James told his brother. I picked people over an institution, and I'd do it again." His brother hung up. James never heard from him again. The next year brought more battles. Court cases against tabloids. More interviews. More stories. And finally, in 2023, the book Spare, Harry's full story. In his own words, James read it before publication. Harry had asked him to, had wanted his perspective on certain security details that would be included. Reading those pages felt like watching someone bleed onto paper. The loss of Diana, the cruelty of being the spare, the backup, the one who didn't matter as much, the racism Meghan had faced, the betrayal by family members who'd leaked stories to protect themselves. "Are you sure you want to publish this?" James asked when he finished. Harry nodded. "I've been silent my whole life. I've protected them, defended them, made excuses for them. And where did it get me? Where did it get my wife?" He shook his head. "The truth has to come out. All of it. Because maybe, just maybe, it'll save someone else from going through what we did." The book released in January 2023. It became the fastest-selling memoir in history. Millions of copies sold in days. People couldn't stop reading. Couldn't stop talking about it. James watched the storm from behind the gates of Harry's Montecito home. The press camped outside for weeks. Helicopters circled overhead. Paparazzi hid in bushes with telephoto lenses. Inside, Harry dealt with the aftermath. Phone calls from lawyers. Statements from the palace, each one more cutting than the last. Silence from his father, newly crowned King Charles. Silence from William. But there were also messages of support. From veterans Harry had worked with through Invictus Games. From people who'd lost loved ones to suicide and saw their own pain reflected in Meghan's story. From those who'd felt crushed by institutions that valued image over humanity, Harry wasn't alone. He was just learning who his real family was. One morning in February, James found Harry in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds. Meghan was inside with both kids now. Lilibet had been born in 2021. A daughter they'd named after Harry's grandmother, but who would likely never meet her. "I used to do this at Kensington," Harry said, not looking up. "Garden. Get my hands dirty. It was the only place I felt normal." James knelt down beside him, helping with the weeds. They worked in silence for a while. "Do you regret it?" James asked finally. "Leaving? Writing the book?" Harry sat back on his heels, dirt on his hands, sun on his face. He looked older than his 38 years. The weight of the past 3 years had carved lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I regret that it had to happen this way," Harry said slowly. "I regret that my kids won't grow up knowing their cousins. That they'll never have what I had with William before everything fell apart." His voice caught. "I regret that speaking my truth meant losing my family." He pulled another weed, tossed it aside. "But do I regret protecting my wife? Saving her life? Giving my children a chance at something better than what I had?" He shook his head. "Never. Not for a second." James understood. This was the price of choosing love over duty. Of choosing healing over silence. Of choosing yourself over an institution that would grind you down to nothing if you let it. That spring, something shifted. The constant media attacks began to slow. New scandals emerged, new royals to obsess over. Harry and Meghan were old news. They started to build a life. Real work with real purpose. Meghan's podcast about women's stories. Harry's memoir had opened doors to other projects, to causes that mattered. Mental health advocacy. Supporting veterans. Fighting for privacy rights in the digital age. James watched them find their footing. It wasn't the fairy tale people had imagined when they got married. It was messier, harder, more real, but it was theirs. One evening in May, James was doing his final security check when Harry called him into the living room. Meghan was there too, and both kids were asleep upstairs. "Sit down," Harry said. "We need to talk to you about something." And James felt a spike of concern. Had something happened? Had security been compromised? But Harry was smiling. A real smile, the kind James hadn't seen in months. We're okay, Harry said quickly, reading James's expression. More than okay. We just wanted to say thank you. Properly. Meghan leaned forward. You left everything for us. Your career, your family, your entire life. And we've never properly acknowledged what that meant. James shifted uncomfortably. I made my choice. Same as you. We're grateful, Harry said. But more than that, we want you to know you're not just our security anymore. You're family. You've been with us through the worst of it. You've seen us at our lowest and you stayed. That's not something we take lightly. Meghan pulled out an envelope. We know we can't pay you what the palace could have, but we wanted to give you something else. Security in your own life. Inside the envelope was a check. More money than James had seen in his entire career as a royal guard. Enough to buy a house, to invest, to retire someday. We're also putting you on as a permanent staff member with full benefits, Harry added, and we're writing you into our wills. If anything happens to us, you'll be taken care of. James stared at the check, at these two people who'd been called selfish and greedy and ungrateful, who were giving him more than his own government ever had. You don't have to do this, he said, voice rough. We know, Meghan said softly. We want to. That night, after Harry and Meghan went to bed, James sat in the security room and thought about the past 3 years. The chaos, the pain, the impossibility of it all. He thought about the boy Harry had been, trapped in a palace, watching his mother be destroyed, and the man he'd become. Willing to walk away from everything to save the woman he loved, people would argue for years about whether Harry had made the right choice, whether he'd been brave or foolish, whether his book had been necessary or vindictive. But James knew the truth. He'd seen it. Lived it. Harry had chosen life over legacy, love over duty, and in doing so, he'd broken a cycle that had destroyed generations of royals before him, that was worth more than any crown. 3 years after Spare was published, James stood in the backyard of Harry's Montecito home, watching Archie and Lilibet play in the evening light. They were older now. Confident kids who laughed easily and played without fear. They didn't know what it meant to be royal. They just knew they were loved. Harry emerged from the house, coffee in hand, and stood beside James. They'd developed this routine over the years. Evening check-ins. Quiet moments where words weren't always necessary. Got a call from William today, Harry said casually. James turned to look at him. In 3 years, William hadn't spoken to his brother. Not once. He's getting divorced, Harry continued. Wanted advice? Asked if I knew any good therapists in London. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. William, the perfect prince, the one who'd stayed and done his duty, was now facing his own crisis, and he'd reached out to the brother he'd cut off. What did you tell him? James asked. I gave him 3 names. Told him I'd be here if he needed to talk. Harry's voice was steady. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a long time. But holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. That was the thing about Harry that had always impressed James. Despite everything, despite the betrayals and the silence and the cruelty, he hadn't let it make him bitter. He'd done the work. Therapy, processing, healing. He'd chosen to be better instead of just being angry. The documentary comes out next week, Harry said, changing the subject. He meant the new Netflix series about his mother, the one that finally told Diana's story from her perspective. Using interviews and footage that had never been released, James had helped with security during filming. It had been emotional for everyone involved, but especially for Harry, revisiting his mother's life, her death, the system that had failed her. How are you feeling about it? James asked. Harry was quiet for a moment, watching his children play. Scared, he admitted. Every time we release something, I wonder if this will be the one that finally turns everyone against us. If this will be the story that proves the palace right, but this is my mother's story, and she deserves to have it told. She died running from cameras, James, chased into a tunnel by people who saw her as a commodity instead of a human being. And the palace, my family, they let it happen. They could have protected her, and they chose not to. His voice hardened. So yes, I'm scared. But I'm more scared of staying silent. The following week, the documentary released. The response was overwhelming. People who'd forgotten about Diana remembered why they'd loved her. New generations discovered her humanity. The palace released no comment, but privately, things began to shift. Charles started calling more regularly. Short conversations, careful ones, but calls nonetheless. William sent a text on Harry's birthday. Just 2 words, miss you. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Completely. But it was something. That summer, Harry and Meghan did something unexpected. They launched a foundation focused on supporting people leaving toxic systems. Cult survivors. People escaping abusive religions. Those walking away from family businesses that demanded too much, because their story wasn't just about royalty. It was about courage. About choosing yourself when the world tells you that you're selfish for doing so. About breaking cycles and building something new from the ashes. James helped with security at the foundation's first event. Hundreds of people showed up. People with stories like Harry's. Different details, different circumstances. But the same core truth? Sometimes leaving is the bravest thing you can do. He watched. Harry spoke to a young woman who'd left a cult. Saw the understanding pass between them. To people who knew what it cost to walk away from everything you'd ever known. After the event, as they drove home, Meghan fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted but smiling. Harry glanced at her, then back at the road. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed? He asked James. James had thought about it. More than once. You'd probably be divorced by now, James said honestly. Or Meghan would be gone. One way or another, you would have lost her. Harry nodded slowly. That's what I think too. He reached over, took Meghan's hand gently so as not to wake her. People think we left because we wanted attention or money or freedom. They don't understand we left because the alternative was death. Maybe not physical death, but death of spirit. Death of soul. Death of everything that made us who we are. They drove in silence for a while. The California coast stretched beside them, vast and open. You know what the strangest part is? Harry said eventually. I'm happier now than I ever was as a prince. Even with all the pain, all the loss, all the public attacks. I'm happier because I'm free. Because I'm living a life I chose instead of one that was chosen for me. James understood. He felt the same way. His old life had been secure, predictable, safe. This life was uncertain, complicated, challenging, but it was real. They pulled into the driveway. Lights were on inside the house. Home, Harry helped Meghan inside, then came back out to where James was doing his final security check. Thank you, Harry said. For all of it. For staying when everyone else left. James shook his head. You don't have to keep thanking me. Yes, I do. Harry's voice was firm. Because loyalty like yours is rare. Especially in the world I came from. You could have stayed with the palace. Had an easier life. But you chose the harder path because it was the right one. He extended his hand. James shook it. But then Harry pulled him into a brief hug. Brothers, not Prince and Guard. Years later, when people would ask James about his time with Prince Harry, about the royal exit and the book and all the controversy, he would think about moments like this. Quiet moments. Human moments. He would think about a man who'd been told his entire life that duty mattered more than happiness. Who'd watched his mother be sacrificed to that duty. And who'd finally said, enough. He would think about a woman who'd been strong enough to ask for help. In a system that had been cruel enough to refuse it, he would think about 2 children growing up free from the prison of royal expectations. And he would think about his own choice. Made years ago in a cottage in Windsor, is to stand beside people instead of institutions. Some stories don't have happy endings. But they do have true ones, and sometimes that's enough.